welcome to another edition of Beyond Backstage, part of Symphony 21's 2020 fall digital season. George Butterworth was at one time the next great hope for English classical music in the early 20th century. Almost prodigious in many ways, Butterworth is sometimes credited with creating the folksy English quality that we associate with that time period in the UK. When World War I broke out, though, he answered the call. Butterworth joined the British Army as a private in the Duke of Cornwall's Light Infantry and became a second lieutenant in the 13th Battalion Durham Light Infantry. Butterworth's letters are full of admiration for the ordinary miners of County Durham who served in his platoon. His division was pivotal in capturing the western front of the village of Contalmaison on the Somme. George Butterworth, aged 31, was awarded the Military Cross on August 25, 1916. He did not survive to accept that honor. Alongside Canadian forces, Butterworth's division was ordered to attack a communications trench known as Munster Alley at the Battle of the Somme. The soldiers dug an assault trench and named it Butterworth Trench in their officer's honor. Butterworth captured and held on to Munster Alley, albeit with heavy losses. At 4:45 a.m. on August 5, 1916, amid frantic German attempts to recapture the position, Butterworth was shot through the head by a sniper. His body was never recovered for reburial following the fierce bombardments of the final 2 years of the conflict. He was famously a brilliant musician in times of peace and an equally brilliant soldier in times of stress. Before our Remembrance Day 2020 release of our performance of Butterworth's On the Banks of Green Willow, I'm honored to be speaking to some members of the Canadian Armed Forces who serve in the bands. The tradition of musical ensembles as part of the armed forces is a long and important one, and these musicians serve in a special and vital role, and one that is perhaps unknown to many. Up first, I'm speaking with Sailor First Class Simeon Weststeijn, a percussionist with the Naden Band of the Royal Canadian Navy based in Victoria, British Columbia. Simeon completed his Bachelor's of Music at UBC in percussion performance, where we were actually classmates, and his Master of Music at the University of Victoria. Hi, Simeon. It's great to see you.
Hey, Jaelem.
For people who are unfamiliar with the idea of military musicians, can you elaborate on what your job is exactly and how you became a musician in the Naden Band? What is the role of a musician in the military, really?
For sure. So I've been with the Naden Band since 2018, and my job primarily with the Naden Band and the Naden Band as a whole is to provide musical support to Canadian Armed Forces and the general community at large. So what that means is we provide musical support for military events such as change of command, ceremonies, formal dinners, and things such as Remembrance Day and Canada Day ceremonies.
Well, and I know before I met you, I didn't really know anything about musicians in the military, and it's something so common for especially many in Canada to pursue as a career. So it's great to hear that, as you know, for people who like me before music may have been unfamiliar with the idea of a musician being in the military at all. As someone who has been part of the military from cadets to now a full-time job, as you said, in the Naden Band, how has the military shaped your music and playing? How has the Naden Band specifically further influenced your musicianship?
All right. So I wouldn't necessarily say that being in a particularly militaristic band would have influenced my playing specifically from that regard, but I am very incredibly fortunate to be able to perform alongside very incredibly accomplished colleagues. We have our bassoon player has her master's degree from Juilliard. One of our clarinetists has a master's degree from the Manhattan School of Music. And just being able to play alongside such incredible musicians just, I find, raises my own musicality on a daily basis. So it's definitely been a bit of a journey. It took me about 10 years from when I first discovered the career option that a military musician is to getting to become a full-time military musician. That was a 10-year process, and there's definitely a lot of learning along the way. I find that my education that I learned in both my undergrads and my master's degrees plays into the role a lot because the bands are a little bit smaller than what you would see, especially compared to university ensembles. So being able to have the adaptability and versatile musicality background that came with my undergrad has been incredibly beneficial to my daily playing as a Canadian Armed Forces musician.
Well, and that's a good segue too, because as I said, and for everyone watching, we were, Simeon and I were classmates, and I was a percussionist, obviously, during our time at UBC, doing our bachelor's respectively. And as you mentioned, the idea of playing in a symphonic wind ensemble or a large ensemble in a university setting versus the military can be different. So in that vein, um, as someone who's pursued, as you said, a master's in percussion performance in what we shall call classical music, how does the music you play in the band align or intersect with your training with regards to repertoire and the skills as a percussionist that you're called upon?
Yeah, for sure. So for the classical side of things, as it is a wind ensemble, we do play what would generally be more defined as classical music because that's what it's written for. But also on the small ensemble side of things, I am required to play a lot of drum set, particularly in the jazz vein of things. So having a mix of the two both allows me to build on my current skills as a primarily classically trained percussionist, but also introducing new skills to continually build on my skills as a jazz drum set player.
Well, and in many ways, in past interviews with Symphony 21, we've talked about the idea of what a professional orchestra is and how it's becoming more and more um, uh, broad in what they play on a regular basis. So in many ways, working within the military sounds like it's, almost like a professional large ensemble outside of the armed forces, as it would be in any major city or any town.
Yeah, of course.
So with all that in mind, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with your job and a lot of music that you play. But in your opinion, what's the most special part of your job since you joined the Naden Band?
I absolutely love the opportunities that my job provides. When I first joined the band, I actually was incredibly fortunate enough to go down to Santiago in Chile to participate in their 200-year anniversary of their Navy. So just being able to interact with the cultures down there and meet some friends and just see all the culture was incredible. And then the following summer, I had the incredibly vast honor of standing on Juno Beach on D-Day for the 75th anniversary and talk to some of the veterans who were part of the D-Day assault. And that's undescribable. It's just a very humbling experience. I also was fortunate enough to be able to see Vimy Ridge while I was in France, which it's breathtaking. It's highly recommended that people check that out. On a more local side of things, I just love the opportunity that the bands provide. I've been fortunate enough to play for dignitaries, politicians, just tour around the province performing for other local communities. And one thing that I really, really enjoy that the Naden Band does is a tradition that we call a side-by-side concert, which we play with the University of Victoria Wind Ensemble. And that provides guidance for the students so that they can sit next to professional musicians and learn that way. But it also allows the Naden Band to take on larger works that we would not necessarily be able to perform on our own purely because of the demand of players that it requires. So I just really love the flexibility and openness and just the new exciting opportunities that come with my job.
Well, and what you said about being able to play with students from UVic is a great segue into our last question already. But it has to do with, again, the role that you play in the armed forces and the role that every band musician in the armed forces plays with regards to representation, with regards to community building, education, is incredibly important. But in that vein, especially given COVID and the fact that live performances for every organization or every aspect of the performing arts, whether it's in the military or otherwise, is obviously compromised. On top of that, I know that the Naden Band is celebrating its 80th anniversary this year. So with all that kind of mixed together, and with such a rich history of the band, of traveling overseas and being deployed overseas, and providing educational opportunities, what are the plans for the future, both during COVID and perhaps post-COVID, if you can speak to that, for reaching out to new audiences in the 21st century in this format?
Well, right now we are focusing a little bit more on the social media side of things so that we can still interact with the local community at large and provide musical support for the Canadian Armed Forces as best as we can. Back in May, we actually collaborated with the Stadacona Band out in Halifax. They're the full-time Navy band in Halifax, and we put together a series of videos for the Battle of the Atlantic ceremonies. So that those were released throughout the day for that. We are currently working on video series for the Remembrance Day ceremony. And regarding the 80th anniversary, that was officially back in September, we had a number of videos that were released throughout that week. And we are still currently releasing video interviews with past former members of the Naden Band on Mondays. So those are going to be released for the next few weeks. But it's really interesting to hear just some of the stories that they have and being able to see how the band has just changed over the years. The Naden Band and the musical community at large is always just constantly changing, and sometimes adaptation is required. I myself personally have definitely taken on more a video editor role. So transitioning from primarily a performer to being dual performer and video editor has been both incredibly fun and also incredibly challenging experience for me. But I'm definitely looking forward to doing more of that in the future.
Well, Simeon, it was great to speak to you, especially right before this year's Remembrance Day. It was great to gain a bit more perspective on the idea of a military musician in general, what that role entails, and also a little bit of your experiences. So thanks again for chatting with me, as well as our entire Symphony 21 audience. Wishing you the absolute best for the future.
Thanks for having me.
Now joining me is Corporal Kevin James of the Royal Canadian Air Force. Kevin completed his Bachelor's of Music in Euphonium at Brandon University and joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2007. Kevin has toured with the band extensively, including their recent duties at the Changing of the Guard ceremonies in London, England in 2018, as well as the D-Day 75th anniversary commemorations in Normandy, France. He was also deployed on active duty in Kandahar, Afghanistan in 2009. Kevin, it's great to see you.
Hi, Jaelem.
So we'll jump right in. First question, what does the Royal Canadian Air Force do as a band that is unique to them? And what is the most special part of working in your ensemble?
Well, the RCAF band, which is short for the Royal Canadian Air Force Band, has an incredibly diverse capability. There's a long list of ensembles that are in our band, but one of the primary ones that makes up the RCAF band is Jetstream. They're a highly sought after show band. They play all kinds of music. I haven't had the personal privilege to play with them yet, but they'll play, anything you can name: rock, pop, country, R&B, funk, disco, and the list goes on. So it's really cool to witness and be a part of the same organization as Jetstream. What I personally enjoy is playing with these musicians and all the environments that we get to play in. One day you could be performing at a military ball or a gala, you could be in the concert hall on stage, or you can find yourself marching to Buckingham Palace with the parade band.
Yeah, and as I was speaking to Simeon and later Joanna, that's definitely a trend that I see across all the bands, is that you guys get to do so many interesting things, and it's never a dull day playing as a musician. As I mentioned in our intro, you were deployed to an active combat zone in Kandahar in 2009. I know that before I started my studies at UBC and music formally, I didn't really have an idea, as I expect many don't, the idea of what a musician is in the armed forces, let alone that musicians are or can be deployed in combat zones. So my question is, how common is it for musicians in military bands to be deployed to combat zones, and what was the impetus for you to do so?
So that's definitely a multi-layered question, and I'll just clarify that when I deployed to Afghanistan in 2009, I wasn't yet a musician in the military. I entered the Canadian Army as a reservist. I was an artilleryman, and I was serving attached to C Battery of the 1st Royal Regiment of Canadian Horse Artillery in Shiloh. So that was in 2009. Since childhood, I always wanted to, serve my country, and the timeline of the Afghanistan operations presented me that opportunity that I couldn't let pass me by. Now, for military musicians to be sent to that specific type of role and operational environment is definitely unheard of. However, I know for a fact it's not entirely uncommon, or rather, I'll say it has happened before, but it is rare. For military bands and their personnel as musicians to be deployed to operational environments is not rare in itself, to be performing as musicians. If you look at military roots, there were several military bands deployed to Europe during World War II. Even in recent years, we've had members of our band deployed to Kuwait and to Kandahar to support the troops in a musical role there. So that's what I can say for my own experience versus the common experience for a military musician to deploy to that type of environment.
Well, and in that vein, do you find it difficult to reconcile your experiences, as a person and just a human being with regards to your different roles in the military that you have served in? Because on one hand, playing music in any type of ensemble or even a small chamber setting is extremely collaborative, and it brings out a lot what I think are the best qualities in humanity. And on the other hand, serving in maybe not such a collaborative environment as active combat.
Jaelem, I've been asked this question several times, and I've yet to pinpoint my exact answer, but I think I'm getting closer to it every single time. The reason I trip up on this question is because I struggle to see the differences between the two, though they seem very obvious. And the reason why I struggle to find the differences between these experiences is because I'm the same person. And that person is one who holds and adheres to the principles of the Canadian Armed Forces. And I'm still that person serving my country, just in a different capacity and a different role. Now, soldiers, sailors, aviators, we all share a common goal of using a collaborative approach, whether we be in active combat, like you say, or be performing in an ensemble. It's actually a commonality between the two experiences. And I think I've been able to bring a lot of my experience as a gunner to the band room, especially effective communication. That has to be the most vital component in each role. And my inner cloth is the same, and I'm just doing a different job for the same country.
That's really amazing. Just to wrap it up, you've been so generous with your time, but one thing that is plaguing all arts organizations, whether it's theater, music, museums, etc., and as I suspect even within the performing arts branches of the military, is COVID, obviously, and the times that we're living in, and finding ways to connect to communities when performances are not viable. So in this time, how is the RCAF band finding ways to connect with communities as an ensemble and as a performing arts organization within the military?
That's also a great question. We've certainly been challenged to continue our mandate and do what we want to and must do as musicians, which is play together. So we've certainly had to think outside of the box. And something we've seen a lot is an online presence from artists in particular. Early on, we were tasked with providing recordings from home, individual tracks of pieces we wanted to play. And we're so fortunate to have our dedicated sound engineer, which is also unique to this band, and their team to help engineer our tracks together to create our online performances as if you were listening to them recorded in the same room. So that's been really cool, and we're really privileged to have such an experienced team working on those types of projects. And as your orchestra is doing, the RCAF band is celebrating some of our past performances as well through our Music Monday series. Each Monday we try to share a past recorded performance and reach out to the community, keep everyone's spirits up, keep everyone involved, and show our face as a military entity.
Well, I encourage everyone watching and listening at home to check out what the RCAF band is doing, both on Music Mondays and beyond, to stay up to date with their fantastic performances. Thanks again, Kevin, for doing this and for being a part of this, and for everything you've done from 2007 onwards. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and hope to do it again sometime soon.
It's my pleasure, Jaelem. Thanks for having me.
Now joining me is Sergeant Joanna Venturanza of the Canadian Army. Joanna completed her Bachelor's of Music in Trombone and Education at the University of Western Ontario and her Bachelor's of Education at the University of Toronto. She joined the Canadian Armed Forces in 2013. Joanna is currently a reservist and part of the 5th British Columbia Field Artillery Regiment of the Royal Canadian Artillery. Joanna, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So we'll dive right in. Can you tell me and everyone listening what your journey has been in joining the military and becoming both a reservist and musician in the Canadian Armed Forces, and why you made the decision to pursue this as a career?
Well, the idea to join the reserves came to me from my high school band teacher in my senior year of high school. He told me of this great opportunity called the Band of the Ceremonial Guard in Ottawa, where I could get paid to play music on Parliament Hill. At the time, I didn't know much about it, so he continued his pitch on Ceremonial Guard, saying that a lot of the young professional musicians, conductors, composers that we've been studying about in class have gone through the same training and have played for the Band of the Ceremonial Guard. He also let me know that part of the job is getting enlisted to the Army. So the prestige of being chosen to perform with the Band of the Ceremonial Guard, as well as the honor of serving as an enlisted member of the Canadian Army, are the two reasons why I decided to join. So in my last year of Bachelor's in Music Education, I applied and auditioned and was fortunate enough to be chosen. Since then, since joining the reserves as a musician, I've had the great privilege to play trombone with not only the Band of the Ceremonial Guard, but also the Band of the 7th Toronto Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery in Toronto, Royal Canadian Artillery Band in Edmonton, and now I'm with the Band of the 5th Field Regiment RCA here in Victoria, BC. I've instructed at the School of Music at CFB Borden, Ontario. I've traveled to France to participate in the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And I've also played trombone at Buckingham Palace in England to perform Changing of the Guard there with the Royal Canadian Artillery Band. Currently, I am instructing on a basic military qualification course, or basic training, or BMQ, as most people know it. It's my secondary task, in addition to my duties as a musician with the Band of the 5th Field Regiment.
Well, and I mean, that's a lot, and one theme that I think everyone's picking up that's watching this between all three interviews today is how varied and amazingly diverse not only your job, but everyone's job in the military is, with so many different hats. So that's really amazing to hear. In that vein, how does your training as a musician, from your degrees in what many people would call classical music conservatories, how does your training as a musician influence your daily activities in the forces that maybe are non-musical? And do you find that your musical training brings a unique or different perspective to your job?
Absolutely. My training as a musician and as a music educator has definitely influenced the way I develop, perfect, and practice my soldier skills, as well as how I teach those soldier skills to new recruits and junior soldiers in the unit. So for example, I use the same methods or practice methods that I use when I practice music for a performance or a gig when I develop those soldier skills. First, I look at the individual or common goal that needs to be achieved. Then I break it down to manageable chunks for practice and analysis. Then I create my practice plan. And during those practice sessions, and as I refine my work, I continually reflect on what I can improve upon the things for which I need to seek mentorship on from a more senior or experienced colleague, what details I need to pay more attention to or assign more practice time on, and the things I'm already doing well and should continue to do. So this process that I use to practice and play music can be applied to working on concert or solo repertoire as a musician, but it can also be applied on drill or weapons handling as a soldier. And in addition to that, when I play the trombone, it's almost always with an ensemble, so at least 4 more people in that ensemble. In the same way, when I do drill or conduct weapons handling drills, we always do it as a group. So when we come together to do drill and weapons training as a section, I'm looking at it as a group effort, like an ensemble, and I'm looking for the same things such as cohesion, balance, accuracy.
Well, and it's as I've said in the other two interviews, when I started my own musical training, I had no idea that there was such a integral part of the armed forces was the music component. So in some ways, it's amazing for me to hear all these practice skills that, having gone through a conservatory setting as well, how often they're used in your role. So these set of interviews are coming out before George Butterworth's or a rebroadcast of George Butterworth on the Green Willow. Butterworth was one of England's foremost composers who was killed in World War I. These interviews will be coming out right before that, coming out before Remembrance Day 2020 on November 8th. Or sorry, I should say that these are coming out on November 8th before Remembrance Day on November 11th. What does Remembrance Day this year mean to you from both the perspective of a musician and your role in your non-musical duties as a member of the 5th Field Artillery Regiment?
To me, Remembrance Day means taking the time to remember and honor those who have served before me, have served and paid the ultimate sacrifice, and as well to honor and thank those who are currently serving. As a musician, I am lucky enough to be able to honor them in my own way by providing musical support in ceremonies. These ceremonies can, evoke powerful emotions and vivid memories. And I'm grateful that I'm able to provide musical support that may help family and friends express and embrace those emotions and memories. In my non-music role, I let others know in my regiment what it means to me too, so that, if it's not personal to them yet, it will to them. And also they get to know more people in the regiment. This year, our ceremonies are held virtually for the health and safety of all during the COVID, though I am looking forward to next year when hopefully we can hold in-person Remembrance Day ceremonies.
Well, and thanks again. You've been so generous with your time. Just to finish up our little interview, you've mentioned so many different parts of your job and so many different skills that you need, so many different hats that you wear, not just within your career as a whole, but it seems within, a day in the life, if you will. With all those different activities, what is the absolute favorite part of your job in the Canadian Armed Forces?
My favorite part of my job, honestly, is I would say it's getting to work with incredibly talented, dedicated, and motivated people. I'm not just talking about my colleagues in the music trade. I'm talking about my colleagues in other trades: infantry, artillery, combat engineers, trades that deal with logistics, service and support, hospitality. Yeah, throughout the years of serving in the Army, I'm most grateful for that, as well as the invaluable skills that the Army has taught me.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, Joanna. Thank you for everything that you do on a daily basis. It's been fascinating to hear from you, as well as Kevin and Simeon, and it's amazing to hear how different everyone's experiences are, but also how many similarities there are. So thanks again for joining me. Please stay safe and hope to talk to you again soon in the future.
You stay safe too. All right.